Hello all, good morning, good evening or good afternoon based on wherever you are. So in continuation to the series where we are learning about how you interact with different kind of APIs from Business Central using AL code, we'll continue where we left with the basic authentication. So in the first part we understood how basic authentication worked, and then we also tried to do a little bit of coding around get. We'll complete the part which was left on the get, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to complete the post, delete and patch requests with this particular video. If you haven't seen the previous videos, I would highly encourage you to at least see the part 1 of this one so that you have the context of it. And I'm hoping I would be able to put a link to that video here. Otherwise that will be available in the description and I'll also on the pinned comment of it. Now people who are new, the code for this series is available on GitHub. The repo is called Dynamics 365 BC API consumption, and all the code that we have done is already available here, and there are 12 changes that we have done from the beginning, and we'll be doing a lot more. Okay, so before we begin, a humble request that if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. That helps us to understand how we are doing. That also helps us to act as a motivation for us that yes, people are liking our content and it's worth the effort that we are putting into it. Okay, so let's continue. So before we go there, let's see what we had. So on the basic authentication scenario, and let me zoom this in if that makes sense, we did create a table. We called it SDH customer, which has certain fields, and to support this table we had a list page and a card page, which is just for viewing purposes of these records. Then on the code unit side, we did build the request response management, where we tried making a call to the get API, which then generates a response, and to begin with we just generated a message to see what the response looked like. So let's publish this again and try to see where we were so that we move forward from there. The idea would be to have those responses stored in the custom table that we have created. So in the basic auth page, I did this, and I added my user ID and my web service access key, right? Okay, and then I did a get. What happens with this is it returns me a list of all the customers in the API endpoint that I'm calling. For the demo, we are using the API from the same database, but you could be using a different API endpoint for that. Now let's understand what happens when we get a customer. Now, when you're trying to get a customer, you might get all the customers like this, which is something like getting an endpoint, calling an endpoint, something like this, which gives you all the customers, which eventually means that you have all the customers that are available in that table or in that API endpoint. Or you could request a get statement with a specific customer keyword. The difference between this response and this response would be that this is giving you an array of type value which have all the customers, whereas when you send this, okay, this is not found, my bad, I should have picked the ID. Okay, so if I pick the ID from here and I'm only looking for this particular customer, I can just place that in here. And in this particular case, if I specified the system ID of that customer, I'll only get one response out of it. So how we process this, and I guess we had an example like this. So let's create a new code unit to kind of handle the responses that are coming from it. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to create a new code unit. So let's create a new code unit, and we'll call it as SDH customer API data management. Okay, let's do finish. Now on the similar lines, if you remember in our previous scenario, if I'm not wrong, and I can be wrong, yes, we have this function called write record in database, which was either returning an object or returning an array. And we have the logic built for it, that if it is an object, then read the object, otherwise read the array. So what I can do is I can copy all these three methods to save time and place them here. I might have to do a little bit of tweaking, but that's okay. Let's see what that is. So let's write it or change the function name as process get response. Hopefully that makes sense, and we'll get a response. This was a specific case, so I can just go ahead and completely eliminate this from all the scenarios that I have. Okay, and okay, I'm just removing it from everywhere, whereas that method was available because we built it for a specific purpose. Okay, so if you reutilize this method, it should help us to kind of write things into it. There was a line item which we don't need, so I can just eliminate this and we'll redesign this function as needed. Okay, so what's happening here, let's understand. It is trying to read the response that came in and then checks is it an object or not, and if it is not an object, then it tries to read it into the array, the response into the array. If it is not an array, then you get an error message. Otherwise, if it's an object, it reads the object, and if it is an array, then it reads the array, which eventually iterates for each item in the array, and then again calls the read the object. Oh, we also have a write header into the database, which is needed. So let's replace it with, and we'll see it. Okay, so the fields that we have in our customer table, let's go into the table, are these: number, name, address, address to, phone number, and the system ID of the actual record. We just want to fill them in. So what I'll do is, I don't want to waste your time into it, so what I'll do is I'll just copy paste it so that it's easier for everyone and we save time into it. I have it, I'm just copying the variables, and if needed I'll walk you through around it, and then I'm also copying the code that's needed for it, which is, we'll just try to read the responses from the endpoint that we are receiving, and we are just trying to parse that response into a table. Here it is. Okay, so let's look at it. If it is an object, and you can go back and look at this object, I'm saying in the object, if you find the response name, which is the name or the display name, then store it into the response name. The number, which is the customer number, store it into the customer number. Same way, address, address to, phone number, and the ID, because these are the fields that I would like to save into my environment, into my table. And then I also will have to write a function to write data into the header, which is pretty simple and a neat insert, more or less. So I can just go back and save time here also for you, which is just based on all these parameters, is writing record into my custom table, right? Okay, so this will read the object. Now what happens when there is an array? If it is an array, it tries to read all the items into the array, each individual object, and then pass that object to read from the actual function. So hopefully this should do our work, and we should be able to see the responses into our table. So let's publish this. Let's see what happens. Before we do that, let's verify what is in SDH customer. Currently it's empty, and the expected output is that when I do a get, Oh, I haven't called that function, my bad. Okay, let's copy it here and go into the request response management, assign it here, and then let's enable this piece. Okay, and I don't want to generate a message now because I have that handled. And here I would like to call the, or rename this to SDH customer API data management. And then here I can write the function name process get responses, which will read the response that is coming in and will save them there. I don't need this false or true. Okay. So this, if everything goes well, which it should be hopefully now, and I should be able to see the expected output of it. So let's do a get again. Oh, it did not get refresh. I'll have to go back to the page, generate the URL, key in my username and my web service access key. You can actually put your password. And let's do a get here. It says there is no property of number in the object. Now when you look at it, the number is a property, but right now I'm trying to get all the customers, not this customer. So when I remove this and try to do this, oh, because it is treating this as an object. So if you look at it, the responses in the example from where we copied it is a little bit different. In the example from where we copied it, in case of employees, I guess, it had either an array as a written value or an object. And using that pattern, what we did here, we wrote the logic that either you will find an object or you will find an array. But when you look at this Postman results, this is an object even if I'm asking for all the customers, and even this is also an object. So in both the cases, the response is still an object, like this. So I'll have to tweak the code to support the structure, which is specific to my need here, and then go forward with it. So the first thing, let's rename these variables so that it's easier for me. Let's call it as customer object. Okay, and let's call this as customer array. Okay, so we will have to read, but I don't think we need an is object validation here because it will always be an object. But this will load that object into my JSON object. Once I have the JSON object, what I can see that in the case of when I'm fetching all the customers, I'm getting a key value pair for the value, which is an array. So I can actually check here in this case that does the customer object, is my customer object contains the parameter which I am looking for, and if it is found, then it's an array, and if it is not found, let's wrap this in, then it becomes an is object. Okay. So now if the value is not found, then it is a single object, but if it is found, then it is an array. As simple as that. Now once you know that it is an object or an array, I just have to deal with it when it is not an object or when it is an object. If it is an object, then we'll read the object, which is correct. There's no changes on that. But if it is not an object, which is this case, then I'll have to get that array from it if it is not an object. So let's do a begin end. I don't think I'll need this, but okay. Now what we are going to do is, from the customer object that we have, we will actually try to do a read from, which is the response text that we got again, and then we will try to get the value array, and the get actually needs a result token, which is a JSON token. So I'll need to define a JSON token. So let's do a customer token, which becomes my JSON token. Now using this, I can get the response of the value into the token. Once I have the response into the token, I'll have to convert this token into an array. So how we can do that? Let's do a customer token and see what possibilities are there. Oh, I have an as array. The return type of this is a JSON array. So I can actually pass my customer array and assign that to response that is coming into the array. Yes, there is some error handling that I should be doing, which I haven't done yet. So I'll surely do it later. But this should do the magic, and then hopefully everything else should work. So let's do a publish and see what happens. Okay, I'm here. I should surely come back to this page, generate the URL key in my authentication info. Okay, and let's do a get. Response processed successfully. So if your response is processed successfully in the HDH customer table, I should see all the customer that are in the customer table deployed here is on the code that we have written. So just by writing a simple JSON code, you can actually process the response that is coming from your API endpoint, as we did here for the get record. Now I'm pretty sure once we have done the get record, I'm pretty sure other records would be easier, but let's have a look on the API resource from Microsoft. So this is what we are trying to process. We tried the get. Now let's try to do a post. Now post eventually means that you're creating a new object, and to create a post you have to call the post, the static endpoint, which is the companies and the customer, and then in the body you have to define what properties you want to specify for that. So let's try doing that. I think it should be simple enough. I hope so. So let's go ahead and do this. I'll just copy this, paste it here, change the method, which is generate post payload, and we haven't generated that function, so we'll define that, and then this becomes, instead of get, the post. Okay, so we are good here. So now let's see what happens with the generate post payload. Is there a definition for it? It's empty right now, so we'll have to define the object that we want to create. Just to make it simple, I would say I need display name. Okay, and I'll take address fields, and let's say phone number field and the email field. So just again, to save time, you have to define it into a JSON object format. So I can just go ahead and paste the values that I need. So these are the values that I would like the new customer that is being created with the post command to be added into it, right? And as we do always, that we write it back to a text. So this becomes my payload text, which then will be sent with the object, with the API endpoint, and it should be creating a record into the customer table with these details. And don't look at this number, this is not my right number, just FYI. Okay, so let's try to publish this. I hope everything looks okay here and the post should work. Okay, so let's refresh this. Let's go here, generate the ports URL, key in our detail. Okay, and let's try to call the post. We have an error message. Okay, let me think about it. Here we are passing authorization and we are passing accept. Now when I look at the create customer, it says you need to pass the authorization for sure, you need to pass the content type, and you also have to pass if match, which I don't think is needed in case of post. Okay, but I guess I know where the problem is. So let's understand it from a very simple perspective. When you try to make an API call from anywhere in the system, there are two kinds of header that are needed, or some API point may only need one kind of header, some may need a multiple headers. Now in this case we were passing the content header, which was given in the get command. The content header points to the content that you are either passing to or you are going to read from. But then there is also a request header. So there are certain difference between request and content header. So request header are sent by the client to the server to provide information about resource that has been requested, such as type of content, authentication details, and others. These headers help server to understand how to handle the request. But then there is another kind of header which is called content header, which is associated with the data that is being sent or received in the body of HTTP message that you're sending. They are part of the content type and can include information like content size, length, and other properties specific to the content. So in some scenarios, you also need a request, you need both a request header and a content header. Now in case of Business Central, your authentication detail or authorization detail actually go into your request header, because that server need to validate that you are the right user. And then in the content header, you have to pass the content type, which is written here. It says request header, but I think you should pass it into the content. But let's give it a try. So I'm not replacing it right now, but I'll write a separate method altogether to get to generate a header. Okay, let's do a but before we do that, let's see here what's happening in the core code unit, because then eventually we're going to call the core code unit. Here if you look at it, till now what we are doing is we were getting the client, which eventually also sets the content, and then using this content we were making the call and we are doing it. Now this request is actually your request message, and if you have to set the request header, they are actually set on the you kind of set it on the content, and then it's all baked into the request header also, because request header adds the authorization detail and other things, and then you write that into the content header, whatever the details that you want to pass, and then your request message adds the HTTP content into it. So eventually it seems that we will also have to create a separate method here. I should be reutilizing it, making it correct, but I'm not changing it right now. Let me create a copy of it. Make request, the same name. I hope you know that you can do that now in Business Center. My responses would remain same, so I'm not going to change certain things into it for sure. So I'll keep it as it is. but instead of I would need the URL that I need, so I'll just copy this as it is. After the URL, I would actually not create that variable here, I'll actually get it from the calling. Okay, so my request message will come from there, and then I'll surely need the HTTP method. Okay, so let's pick that in here. Now from this, what I'll be taking, and I'll just copy this. I should be copying everything at this moment, I guess. Okay, let's paste it here, and let's try to understand what's happening here. Oh, I'm losing the client. I don't want client because client is doing nothing, it's just making the call, right? So I can then change this, flex this to be here, so that my client gets attached here. Okay, now the content which I would like to add, is it a global variable? Yeah, it seems it's a global variable. I don't know why it's a global variable. And I'll correct it later. So I'll remove this because I'll set the content there only. So the difference between this call and that call is just a little bit of parameters. So I'll just copy this so that I remember what parameters I need to pass. Come back here in the post method, comment this out so that I remember it, and comment this out. Okay, I'm getting the URL to access, so let's keep this as it is. And then the second parameter is HTTP request message, so let's say get HTTP request message. I'll create a function for it, right? That becomes my second parameter. Then third is my HTTP method, which I should have here also. So I can actually copy these two as it is and place them here. Okay. So now I have to create a method which returns me a HTTP request message. So let's create a function. Okay, I'm good with this. Okay, here. Okay, so this is going to return my HTTP request message, which I'll name something so that I can use it. Let's say a request message. Okay, so as I said a little while ago, we will have to pass two kind of header. One is a request header, so let's name it as request header of type HTTP header, and everything is an HTTP header. Then we also need the content header, which is also a type of HTTP header. So I could actually place both of them in same line. Save a line in here. So let's try to do that. Okay, first thing first, how I get the request message, request header, is by calling a method from the request message. In the request message, there should be a method to get headers, which will return me the default headers that are associated with this. Get the reference of collection of HTTP header, and then I'll store those header which I'm getting from the message into this, and then I can make any changes that I want to this particular header. Like I can add the authorization parameter into it, so I can do a request header because this is what server will need for me to be validated, which is my authorization, username and password, and then this goes into the request, so I'm good with it. Now I need to set the content header. Now my content header is part of my content, so I'll have to make a variable here to set my HTTP content, and I'll have to name it something, or I can keep it as it is, I guess. not problem. So from my content, where my text is, I can actually do a similar thing, which is get headers, and this will then give me my content header. So I can get the content header. Now in the content header, what Microsoft is saying, that make sure that you have a content type of application JSON. So I don't want to take chances, so what I'll do is I'll say content header dot add, and I'll just add the content type, and the value associated with it is accept JSON. Okay, application JSON. So now I have the content header set. But what if there is already a content type set on the content header? So I can actually do a remove of anything which is of content type. So if there is a content type preset, just remove that and then set what I'm setting into it. So with this, my content header is set. But what I want to return is my request message. So what I can do here is I can say, okay, my request message that I would like to send is getting the content from my content that I have created here. Now let's understand it again. For the request message, I have get the default header and set the authorization header that is needed, and then I got the content header, removed if there is a content type, and then set the content type that I would need, and then added the HTTP content into my request message. So it all goes together as a request message, and when it reaches here, it just adds the URL into it, which is in my request message, and then based on the method define what kind of request it is, and then passes it and gets me the response. Hopefully it all goes well. I'm still in a little bit of doubt, but hopefully I'm doing it wrong. Oh, sorry, right. And I should be able to do a post. Okay, let's try this. I didn't thought that it will be that hard. I had a little bit of idea that it might not work straightforward, but okay, I guess that's the beauty of the time that we are spending, that we don't have to do it again ever, because we figured it out. Okay, let's try to do a post. A body must be provided to the request. Uh-oh, did I forgot the body? I should not have. Okay, get request header. Oh, I did not pass the payload. Okay, sorry, I should have the payload here so that I can also add the payload in my request, right? So let's get the payload, and then in my content I should also add my payload. So right from my payload. Okay, so wherever I'm calling this, am I hopefully calling this? Yes, I should also call this method inside this. Okay, hopefully nothing is wrong now, because if this succeed, I guess everything else is super easy. So we'll see that. Okay, let's see. API handler, post URL. Okay, post. Okay, response processed successfully, and if that had happened, I should see it into SDH customer first to begin with. Yeah, that's the record, my name, my address, and this, and then this becomes the source ID or the ID of the source record. So I can actually copy this, search for customers, and in this I can apply the filter of my system ID, And you see, the record is actually created into my customer entity with the fields that I have provided: my name, address, figure number, and an email address. Very simple. Okay, so now we have two more things left. We did talk about how you get the customers, either one or multiple, or how you create a customer. Now let's cover the delete, because that's easy, hopefully. So let's go back here, and I think the same request should work for delete. So I'll just copy this as it is, and I'll paste it here. Okay, so I'll have to change this to delete. Okay, and then change this to generate delete payload, which is nothing, to be very frank. I'm just trying to maintain the consistency of the functions. But if you look at it, in the delete in Business Central, you don't have to pass any payload, because you're just removing a record, or a record, right? So let's go F5, and then as it refreshes itself, we'll give it some time. Understand the delete part of it from here. When you are trying to delete, you have to call the URL with the company ID, and then also the customer with the specific ID that you want to delete. If you don't pass that, the system doesn't know which record you want to delete. In the response, you will get nothing. So let's go ahead and figure out the system ID for this. Okay, which is 850 something something. Okay, let's close this. C0050 is the customer, so I can actually go into API handler, make a call to delete, and then in the delete, by default in the code, I've set the URL to be with %1, so I can actually copy that and paste that ID in here. If you can look at it, after the customer, so this customer will be deleted. So if everything goes well, I don't expect an error. Let's try to do a delete. So there is no response expected, which makes complete sense. But now if I go back to my customers page, I should not see that C0050 customer here, because that has been deleted via the API call that we made. Okay, so we dealt with get, we talked about delete, we talked about create, and I just want to create one more record because I'll have to run the second part of it. So let's do a post. Okay, one more created, I guess 60 or something. Let's see. Here, C0060. Now we are on updating the customer, okay, which is a patch request. Now in patch, you want to give the prefix, the company ID, and the customer ID that you want to modify, and then in the body you need to provide the fields that you want to update with your request. So as the post had a different URL, I'll just copy that, or the generation process, and hopefully that'll work here, that I'll put it into the patch. Okay, let's do it, generate patch request. Where is the patch? Yeah, patch payload, and then here it becomes the patch. Okay, in the patch payload, let's add some details into it, right? So I'll change my display name for the record that I'm patching. So I'll just copy this here, and I'll change, let's say, my phone number. Okay, so this becomes, instead of Saradhani, API patch, and this becomes 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 times 9. So with this payload, I'm trying to update the customer that I'll provide in the query, and only want to change two things in that record. One is the display name and one is the phone number. So if this command works correctly, I should have my customer up to date with these values. So let's do a publish. Hopefully this works. and there are no surprises on this. Okay, so let's go in here. Let's see the ID of it, because that I'll need to in the patch command. Okay, system ID. Here it is. Let's copy this. Okay, looks good. Still Saradhani as a name, and let me reopen it. It's easier that way. Let's do a patch, and then in the patch URL I'll append the ID of the record that I would like to patch. Here, key in my username and a password. Okay, and let's do a patch. Let's look at the patch requests. Oh, in the header you also have to pass the if match parameter if you are making a patch request. Okay, now that's interesting. Okay, here comes my part where in the request header Microsoft is saying add one more thing. Let's add it. If match is used to identify the record, so if you are already providing a record, that's okay. Otherwise you need to provide the e tag of that resource. What is the e tag? This is your e tag. So based on this, the system understand what you are trying to modify. It's a mandatory requirement, as you can see here in the documentation, that it's a required thing, and you need to add it onto the request header and the e tag if you want, right? Okay, let's do a F5 of it. Hopefully this is it. I'll just copy this so that I don't have to type it again. Okay, I'll paste that here, give it my name, my password, and then let's do a patch. Oh, it seems patch has been successful, because in my code I have written to message out anything in case of patch. So then I'm seeing this, but actual we should be checking on my customer record what actually happened. In my customer record C0060 or something like that. Yeah, if you look at it now, the values for the display name, which is the name, and the phone number has been patched by my API request. Now if you are leaving, wait a minute, let me give you an insight. If you go to the code, what changes you will see. To simplify this, what I'm going to do is I'm trying to merge both of these together, not just for this endpoint but all other endpoints that we have, and then in the parent one I'll also try to merge both of these so that we have one method to call and one method to handle with it, right? The code will be available, as you all know, into our source control. Your feedback will be important. I recently got a very interesting feedback that I sound sleepy when I record stuff. Sorry for that. I normally record late in the night. It's already 2 a.m. India time right now and I'm recording this. I'll try to be as energetic as I can at this time of my day. But what I wanted to mention here is your honest feedback, either good or bad, is required, and I'll try to make changes as you guys give me feedbacks about it. So please do let me know into the comments if you have any questions, if there is a better way of doing this, whatever I showed you doing today. And then you know the drill, right? If you like the content, hit the like button. If you think it'll help your colleagues or some of other community members, then share it on your social media. And as I said in the beginning, if you haven't, then please do subscribe to the channel. It helps us to understand how we are doing. It also helps us with a little bit of motivation of keep doing the good work if you think we are doing the good work. Till then, have a great day. Keep learning, keep sharing. And then there was a huge demand of talking about doing the similar thing, but with the OAuth. So the next part in this series, we'll be talking about OAuth. Hopefully we'll be able to complete it in 2 videos like we are doing for everything. But if not, we'll figure it out. Okay? Till then, have fun, keep learning, and comment guys. Comment, let me know how things are going. Thank you. Have a nice day.